My name is Jill Schumann. I am the Vice President of Programming here at GIH. And I want to welcome you to this webinar on the impacts of the climate crisis on mental health. Such an important topic, and I'm super excited to see that so many of you have joined. I think it speaks to how much this topic speaks to so many of us. And so thank you for spending this time with us today. We have a very comprehensive list of speakers and related topics for you today, which I think you're going to find really exciting and hopefully very practical and useful as well. I've been at Grantmakers in Health for only about 8 months, so I'm relatively new, and I'm looking forward to get to know all of you on this call. If you're new to Grantmakers in Health, we're a philanthropy serving organization that supports health funders of all sizes and all topic areas. We work with hundreds of philanthropies nationwide to help them learn, connect with each other, grow, etc. So again, welcome. I want to make sure that we have plenty of time for this jam-packed session that we have for you today. And I'm going to hand this over to Kalila Booker-Cassano at Heffen to introduce Heffen and herself.
Thanks, Jill. Hi, everyone. Again, my name is Kalila Booker-Cassano. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the Director of Programs at the Health and Environmental Funders Network, or Heffen for short. I'm calling in today from just outside of Boston in Arlington, Massachusetts on Wampanoag land. And just a brief introduction to Heffen, if you are not familiar with us already. We are a national affinity network for funders who focus on environmental health and justice and their intersection with other critical issues facing frontline communities today. Our members come to us to connect, to collaborate, and learn at intersections such as the one that we're talking about today, and how they can take collective action to make greater impact in their giving. I'm particularly excited about this opportunity to collaborate with GIH on this webinar, as the climate and health intersection is really one of our focus areas right now. The issue of climate anxiety, or eco-anxiety in particular, is one nuance that we haven't engaged our members in a lot of conversations around. So I'm really looking forward to this time with all of our wonderful speakers, and hopefully we have some really good and juicy questions that we can get into at the end of our time. But yeah, thanks for taking some time. I know if you're on the East Coast, it's maybe the lunch hour. So if this is your lunch accompaniment, like bon appetit to you. But yeah, I'll pass it to Heather.
Thank you so much, Kalila, and thank you, Jill. It is a pleasure to be here. I think we'll pull up our slide presentations. Welcome to the webinar. Again, we're so thrilled that so many of you have joined to learn more about this emerging area in philanthropy. We're excited today to introduce ourselves to you, Climate Mental Health Network, One Green Thing, Climate Critical, and the Climate Psychiatry Alliance, and we look forward to a very interactive discussion. Just here's a quick agenda. We're going to present kind of formally introductions into who we are, what our mission is, what we do. Then we're going to have a discussion with the panelists, an overview of the issue. We're going to talk about the Gen Z lived experience, frontline communities, the practitioner perspective, the tools and resources that we know and that we've been sharing with each other. And then we'll pivot to Q&A with everyone on this group. So here are the panelists. I'm Heather White. We have Sarah Newman from the Climate Mental Health Network, Maya Penn, Tamara Tolles O'Laughlin, and Dr. Ben Liu. So a dinner table conversation with my teenagers actually changed my whole perspective on climate action. They said to me, "Mom, where are the baby boomers? Where is Gen X? Where are millennials? You cannot leave this crisis all on our shoulders. We feel all alone." Now, I have 25 years experience in climate policy and environmental health. I worked for Al Gore's 2000 campaign. I was a recount lawyer. I also was the executive director of Environmental Working Group. I worked on Capitol Hill. I ran the nonprofit partner to Yellowstone National Park. This was my life's work. And if my kids felt alone in climate action, what was going on around other dinner tables? And so I realized two things. One, I needed to really dive into the research of the mental health impacts of the climate crisis. And two, create a way for more people to see themselves in climate action. So I founded my nonprofit, onegreenthing.org, and also wrote a book that's published by HarperCollins. Eco-anxiety is defined as the chronic fear of environmental doom. And I write about this, I call this the eco-anxiety trifecta. If you know Generation Z kids born after 1997, you have young people in your life that you love, you know anxiety. But you might be surprised that Generation Z is actually the loneliest generation, that they are 8 out of 10 Gen Zers experience loneliness, whereas 5 out of 10 baby boomers experience loneliness. Also, there's a hyper awareness of the climate crisis, driven in a large part by social media. And in fact, in a survey in 2021 of 10,000 young people ages 16 through 25, 1 out of 4 did not want to have children of their own. 1 out of 4 did not want to have children of their own because of the climate crisis. The people who've contributed the least amount of carbon pollution are suffering the most. That is true racially, that is true economically, that is true geographically when we consider the global South, and that is true intergenerationally. So I knew at One Green Thing that we needed to create an opportunity for more people to have conversations about eco-anxiety, to have tools to talk about how they're feeling about the future that we're leaving this next generation, and to support intergenerational action. But I also knew a first step was to try to create a way for people to exercise agency over this very overwhelming issue. So I created an assessment. It's called the Service Superpower Assessment. Think Myers-Briggs or Enneagram, Strength Finders. And through this 5-minute assessment, it asks, who are you in service? How do you show up for the people that you love? And based on your interests, you can then adopt a daily practice of sustainability, what I call One Green Thing. This helps you exercise agency in this huge issue. It also can bring more joy into your life. And this individual action and these tools can also shift the culture. And we need that culture change in order for big climate policy solutions to work. At One Green Thing, our programs also include professional development trainings for mental health providers, leaders in communities, and educators. We're also working to scale our K-12 curriculum on eco-anxiety. We are empowering we're empowering Gen Z through our Climate Leadership Academy to try to recruit other generations into climate action. We're also researching the mental health impacts of climate change and hosting intergenerational workshops. Our board of directors comes from a wide range of thought leaders, from academia, psychology, to environmental health. Those of you, I'm sure, Heffen, you're very familiar with Erin Brockovich and her environmental work. We also have Maya Pin, who is joining us on our conversation today, and a wide range of folks, including the Chief Wellbeing Officer of Deloitte. So a lot of expertise. Next slide, please. Our work at One Green Thing has generated a tremendous amount of press. We've been on Good Morning America, mentioned in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Teen Vogue, and really we're doing all we can to really raise this issue of climate anxiety. In addition to my book, One Green Thing, that I mentioned, which is about eco-anxiety, I have 2 other books that are coming out next year. There's a daily devotional, One Green Thing, inspired, called 60 Days to a Greener Life, ways to ease eco-anxiety through joyful daily action. And then Eco-Anxiety, Saving Our Sanity, Our Kids in the Future, is the paperback version of One Green Thing. I'm so excited about the panel that we have in store for you. I think this is going to be a great conversation, and I'm thrilled to kick it over to Sarah Newman of the Climate Mental Health Network.
Thanks so much, everyone. Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are. My name is Sarah Newman. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm based in Washington, D.C. And thank you again to Heffen and Grantmakers in Health for having us here today. I started the Climate Mental Health Network in spring 2021, really born out of my own struggles with a range of climate emotions, including climate anxiety, and my search for resources and programs, and quickly realizing that there's tens of millions of people who are just like me, who don't have the tools to address their climate emotions, let alone maybe the language to even describe their experiences. So the Climate Mental Health Network is focused on ensuring that people have access to education, tools, and programs to help people recognize, understand, and address the emotional impacts of climate change. And we do that by centering youth in our work because of the data that Heather just shared. And we do a lot of that through intergenerational programming that is reaching educators, teachers in the K through 12 sector, as well as parents and caregivers as well. And in addition to a tiny but very mighty, nimble staff, we have a Gen Z advisory board. We have a scientific advisory board, of which Ben Liu on this call is a member. And starting in January, we're going to have a third advisory board that's focused on strategy and fundraising. So all of our work is rooted in research that we're doing or others are doing. We did a report that was funded by Blue Shield of California. This was the first thing we did, and that was in the summer of 2021, called Climate Change and Youth Mental Health. And that really was foundational to the organization's vision and strategy going forward. And we also did a survey of about 1,000 people about what types of resources and digital tools they might want. We are currently chairing the lived experience working group of the Connecting Climate Minds global research project, which is looking at climate and mental health research. The other research that we're doing is we are leading focus groups with middle school teachers across the United States, and that will be completing actually this week with our last focus groups. And we are also doing focus groups with parents across the United States. And we are about to launch focus groups with educators at the U.S. Forest Service. That will commence in the beginning of January. And so we use all of this research to inform all of our programs. As I mentioned, we have a lot of youth programming. And really, our Gen Z advisory board is focused on uplifting their voices and putting them in leadership roles. We did a documentary film, Gen Z Mental Health, Climate Emotions, which is screened around the world. We have a range of resources for educators. We have resources for parents, and we also have done a lot of work in the communication sector, partnering with media outlets like Apple TV Plus and MTV. And we have a lot of free tools. They're available in English and Spanish. And one of them is this Climate Emotions Wheel, which is caught on like wildfire. It was in Times Square during Climate Week, NYC. It just was at part of a panel at COP. And it is now available in 8 languages and lots more coming soon. And this is used, as we've been told already, by teachers in classrooms across the country. And lastly, I just wanted to share that we co-authored an op-ed in Alliance magazine that was just published yesterday. And it was about inviting the philanthropy sector to understand and really invest in climate mental health impacts to youth, looking at the philanthropy sector in private, public, and corporate. Thanks so much. And back to you, Heather.
And we'll go to my pen.
Thank you so much to Heather and also Heffen and Grant Makers in Health. My name is Maya Penn. I am a Gen Z environmental and climate activist and educator. I have been doing this work since 2008 at 8 years old as a passionate youth environmental activist. I'm also an eco-designer as well as a 3-time TED speaker, an artist, a global keynote speaker, filmmaker, social entrepreneur, and author. I have my own nonprofit organization called Maya's Ideas for the Planet, as well as a climate media production company called Impediment Productions. The majority of my work is focused around not only environmental education, but also the interpersonal work that's required to set people on their journey to climate action. I've spoken at schools and youth organizations around the world, and I have talks that have been translated into over 100 different languages, and I've also taught a number of different courses on sustainability, circular design, and more. And I'm really focused in translating a lot of the emotion that many young people of my generation and people of all generations feel, helping them metabolize that into action and into positive impact in their communities and around the world. I've been speaking about eco-anxiety, climate anxiety, and a lot of the emotional and mental distress that comes with the impacts of the climate crisis. For years, really platformed that even further once the American Psychological Association recognized climate anxiety and eco-anxiety as something that many people do deal with on a regular basis. I have received a commendation from President Barack Obama for outstanding achievement in environmental stewardship. And through my nonprofit, Minds for the Planet, I focus on both humanitarian and environmental justice projects, including projects focused around discussing eco-anxiety and climate anxiety and how to translate that into action. As I mentioned, I've given 3 TED Talks, and one of my talks was one of the top 15 TED Women Talks of all time. I have also been featured across a number of different platforms, including this year I was on the cover of Vogue magazine alongside Billie Eilish, speaking about climate action, Generation Z, specifically how we're impacted by the climate crisis and the solutions that we're hoping to see and implement through our work, both as activists, artists, and people across a number of different industries. I'm also a sustainability consultant. I'm certified in circular economy and sustainable strategy by Cambridge Business School, and I consult both nonprofits and corporations on how they can incorporate environmental social governance and corporate social responsibility holistically into their operations and help them meet those ESG goals, as well as how to engage with Generation Z and how to bring their voices into the fray as they are evolving their organizations or their brand. I also am an artist and an animator and a filmmaker as well. In 2016, during the Obama administration, I was commissioned to animate the opening of the first ever digital report presented to US Congress, and this is again an American Museum of Women's History built in Washington. I've done other animation work for a number of social and environmentally educational projects for Hulu, Adobe, and many more. And right now I am directing and lead animating an environmental action adventure short film called Asali, Power of the Pollinators, which is coming out first quarter of next year, which focuses on biodiversity, the trauma that comes from experiencing environmental disaster, as well as environmental justice, pollinators, and so many other elements of my work as an environmental activist that I don't see translated enough into animated and pop culture media around environmental education and action. And I just want to say thank you so much and really excited to be a part of this conversation. That really means a lot to me.
Next, we'll have Tamara.
Hi, everyone. My name's Tamara Tolzo-Laughlin, which is the most complicated thing that I'm going to say over the next few minutes. For folks who have low vision, I am an African-American woman. I have short hair. I'm wearing a white mask, a red dress. I have short hair. And I am looking pretty good for middle age, if I do say so myself. This slide is up so that I can say very quickly that I am at 26 or 27 years in this work as a climate and environmental activist, a national strategist in this work. These are the places where if you would like to fight with me about any of these things, you should go to these places. Twitter used to be really good for it. Now it's named something else, so it's harder to fight with people you largely agree with. I am, among other things, the CEO and president of the Environmental Grantmakers Association. So I wanted to flag that I am a part of this community. And the reason why, after 26 years of being a climate and environmental activist, being one of the 6 people who launched the climate strikes in 2019, and watching all the beautiful young people that we supported descend into mental health chaos because the adults were jealous of them and not supportive of them and not caring for them, and didn't recognize that there are real deficits across the 5 generations of people who are doing this work. It dawned on me that after years of being able to hold space for people at one organization or another, we needed to dedicate some real space in the work for people to practice rest as a part of their work, to build in ways of working so that your value in climate and environment is not based on your book of business. So this is the vision statement for Climate Critical, which is largely focused on care and repair for people who are experiencing burnout after working on it. So we fight for the people who fight for the planet. I wanted to lift up that the values that we work under are honed from experience. So Climate Critical is made up of folks who have been at this work, the invisible networks of people, largely women of color, largely African-American women, who have been the person you go to when you want to find out is this person really doing the work? Are they a member in the work? These untapped networks of people who you depend on, who are both invisible and essential. If you're thinking of a few folks, I'm sure they're members of this group. So here are just a few of them, largely because it's important for us to think about this as a global practice. We have spent a long time defining leadership in this work in ways that are very harmful for people who do it. So we're not only up against the very real climate crisis, we're also up against the conditions for how we work. And I'll talk a little bit more about how I know that. Just wanted to introduce you to who the we, some of the we. This is an arc of how we do our work. So by identifying that burnout is not unusual to social movements, but that is specifically dangerous in the climate context, we have a set of care practices and programs for activists where we literally pull them out of work to take advantage of some rest alongside other people they really admire so that we normalize the work. And this is the arc of how we do that. I want to talk to you a little bit about the first of a biannual survey that we did that's specifically focused on folks in movement. So the people who build banners and write signs and go to community meetings and stand alongside community folks and provide data and access and are at a bunch of different places at once as arbiters, as translators, as community supports, and as people who often feel a lot of guilt and shame about collecting a paycheck alongside of people who are fighting for their lives. It is important to recognize that Climate Critical Earth is focused on that group because there are other groups focused on what it means to live in a space, in a community where you're fighting things as a matter of your life. Sometimes folks are in both spaces, but if you do it for a living, there's a specific kind of grief that comes from watching the charts and going to all the meetings and being a part of all the conversations and watching the work not move at the rate you need it to, that is special and is recognized differently. And for those folks to move out of burnout, they have to practice that separately from the folks they support. So we did the survey in 2022. The next one will be launched very shortly for our next data set. And the number one thing we figured out is that burnout is real. It exists. It's in every part of the work. Even the people we're fighting are also burnout. And the thing that's weird and important about that is that if even the people we are in opposition with and the people we are closely aligned with are burned out, none of our conversations are happening on a level where we could actually realize any solutions because people are tired, they're exhausted, their bodies are there and their minds are not showing up. So when we surveyed 108 different types of people who work in the work, not people, but we got 108 different sectors of subsectors of climate and environment who responded to this. Funders, staff, organization leaders, volunteers, folks who do it because they care about it and they saw it on the news. They all flagged the same levels of burnt out to very, very, very burnt out. The second thing we learned is that that every single kind of person who is depleted, who is distanced, who is diminished, is really continuing to show up for the work. And next slide, we'll talk about why that is. So we have a lot of people who care about climate, a lot more than is published. A lot of them are experiencing burnout. Not every one of them is experiencing it in the same way because climate, the great multiplier, is affecting everybody. But on top of that, some folks are discriminated against because of the bodies they show up in, the identities they carry. And that's an additional driver of burnout that leads to depression because you feel anger about seeing multiple levels of vulnerability and only being able to respond to the one that is funded. This is a tricky thing that we learned in the study, which is that despite the fact that every single person responded from very burnt out to very, very burnt out to very, very burnt out, none of them are walking away from their jobs because they're worried that the moment that they look away, everything will happen and their life's work will have failed, which is great if you're an employer because it means you don't have to worry about people walking away, but the quality of the work, the ability to envision new ideas, the capacity to respond is diminished in a way that is actually affecting how we work. Finally, I want to lift up that one of the things we asked folks in the survey was if your employer showed up with a bucket of money for you to work on care for yourself, would you take it? We also did focus groups and studies and one-to-ones and conversations with folks, and people said no, because my employer caused my burnout. In most so there was a weird dynamic where people flagged they needed a third space, another place, even if the exact thing they needed came from their boss, they wouldn't take it because the enmeshment of all the issues of trying to fight climate, doing it in a workplace full of people that's depleted, is really just so challenging that it's hard to differentiate. And I want to lift up that there are 5 generations in the workplace at the same time. people who are sunsetting in and out of the work, all experiencing different levels of burnout. And some of them have a legacy of burnout where they're walking away from the work brokenhearted, thinking that it didn't work. Young people who are experiencing burnout from not being welcomed in by folks who are not able to see the big picture and give them the space that they need. So this is a multi-generational conversation that will require multiple generations working simultaneously on rest and care practice. This is just a handful of the folks who are working on what we call rest practices, where twice a year we take people out of their work context to practice rest alongside other people. Some of our members are 80, some of our members are 15, some of them are 40, and together they talk about how different it looks, how much similarities they're experiencing. And we offer what we call unstoppable care through a number of different programs to make sure that people not only build a habit that fights as an intervention against burnout, but maintain it as a lifestyle, because we shouldn't be taking in campaign plans or organizing plans or mobilization plans that don't include rest as a part of how we win. And I'll hand it back. Thank you for the time.
Thanks. And now we'll hear from Ben.
All right. Hello. My name is Ben Liu. I'm here in Oregon, Portland, Oregon. And as I'm hearing Maya and Tamara share some of their own stories, I'm trying to think of how did I end up getting like interested in environment. And I would just recall then I was in Wisconsin. This is about 2016. It's my last year of med school. I somehow ended up at a random conference, like an environmental, just explaining like the state of climate change and what is being done. And at the end of this one climate scientist talk, I can't remember his name, but he mentioned how the Paris Climate Accord saved the chance at saving the world. And then he also had voiced his dismay at like, there's such few young people in this room. And then he just wished me luck in my climate activism. And I was just like, whoa, this huge bag just got dropped in my lap. And I'm thinking like, from there, that's where I really took things into trying to find my way. And then ultimately I found my way into Climate Psychiatry Alliance in this work. And this was about 5 years ago now. Our organization was founded in 2016. I came on board in about 2018 when I was still finishing my psychiatry residency training. But that bag that was just placed in my lap at the end of med school, this is just what our whole society is working on, and what our youth are so much handling and forced upon them. There's a plethora of I guess this work in climate and mental health as far as in the level of the health professions and our schools is really taken off in the 2020s. I'd say education is really, it underpins what we do. We do this at many levels, whether it be the toolkits that we have on our websites, whether it be in our professional society, the American Psychiatric Association, where we fairly early on we're given a caucus, and then only recently given a committee where we have a little more teeth to the funding to help some of our work. We are educating our own psychiatrists. We're educating our district branches in different states and localities, and we're educating our medical students as well, and participating in collaboratives that are focused on that. Many of our steering committee members, I like to quote Dr. Janet Lewis and Dr. Beth Haas in their 2020 paper on climate dialectics. It's in this one Psychodynamic Psychiatry journal, and they speak about the need for containment to help climate distress. And then that gives us the opportunity to hold open the otherwise natural tendency to collapse to one end of opposite extreme thinking, like hope versus hopelessness, individual action versus collective action. And the complexity of the climate crisis requires this containment, as well as holding open these polarities. And then that's where we can regain some flexibility to generatively use and take action towards climate adaptation. So some of the things then, just writing and speaking, making sure that we have, different avenues that we have to do these. I spoke about a couple of these places: giving talks, training students and residents to give talks, spreading the word however we can, whether that's through APA's social media platforms or through participating in other climate aware therapy trainings. We have busy sub-teams, an outreach advocacy team, and we have more recent education and youth teams. This is just a slide. What is an example? And this is also a Dr. Lewis slide, but what is the psychological adaptation? And this is a pretty good summary of it, is turning towards climate change rather than away from it, in a way that's engaged, in a way that allows for positive affect and a sense of well-being, in a way that creates mental space so that we can think more clearly about what to do and continuing to reassess the goals and pathways to those goals. The Ecocyclopedia is a project from one of our other steering committee, one of our illustrious committee members, Dr. Lisa Van Susteren, who has her hands in so many projects. But this is one that I really want to highlight because it is coming online. They are just actually renaming this to EcoSci. The current website is ecocyclopedia.org. This is think of it as like a Wikipedia, but that we are, referencing well and continuing to update. The next two slides are still about the Ecocyclopedia, and this is a joint project between our CPA and psychiatrists, as well as the CPANA, the psychologists, and the CPA UK. It's free, and we're inspired by resource projects like the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy and Project Drawdown. So our mission and vision, just to reiterate, it's sharing the knowledge on the mental health impacts of climate instability and what we can do to address causes and consequences. And this is all to say that education in this space is also new, but it's developing so fast, like really in the past 5 years. There's so much more coming online, not just in climate and mental health, but also climate and health. When we have these broader consortiums like the one housed at Columbia, the GCCHE, and then the Medical Society Consortium on Climate and Health, doing their monthly webinars and many other educational endeavors. It's exciting to see all of what's being developed. There's such a need for this education, whether it's about in the clinic room when we're educating people about air pollution, how to protect yourself from air pollution and extreme heat. And then when we need to bring in the eco distress, like that there are many occasions, certainly in a therapist room, but there are just many occasions where bringing the climate crisis into the awareness of the clinical room, the lecture rooms, is going to prove to be very essential.
Great. Thank you so much for that, Dr. Liu. And I appreciate that perspective. We now are all grounded in who is going to be on the panel. Just a quick overview of our discussion. We're going to have about 15 minutes of discussion from the panelists, and then we'll pivot to questions we may have in the chat. We're going to talk about climate anxiety in the research, the impact on the Gen Z lived experience, frontline communities, the practitioner perspective, and existing tools and resources. First off, I want to kick it off to Sarah. So Sarah, talk to us a little bit about the context of climate anxiety, the latest research, and why this is so important for public health, the public health community.
First, I just want to share that at COP28, they just had, for the first time ever, a day that was focused on health. And so it is the 28th COP, but it finally had a day devoted to health, which was really significant. And mental health was part of that. And so I think it just also reflects, where things are finally moving in the climate space. And just in terms of what the research is, Heather had already mentioned the Lancet study of 10,000 youth worldwide that was published in 2021. That included 1,000 youth in the United States. And of that, 75% said the future is frightening because of the climate crisis. Here in the United States, Blue Shield of California does an annual study, and their study this year of Gen Zers found that 68% said climate is negatively impacting their mental health, but also that 75% have taken action to address climate. And I think that's also an important part of this that had been alluded to before, that looking at through the lens of the climate crisis and mental health, that this is a doorway to engaging people in addressing the climate crisis, that research shows that taking climate action is an important buffer to help people manage their climate emotions, and to do that in, taking action in a very, there was one study that was done last year of 12,000 students in 32 countries that found that their climate anxiety, for students in 25 of those countries, their climate anxiety led to positive environmental behaviors. And the last thing is that from a family perspective, the Aspen Institute found in their research that 82% of parents said children are essential in addressing climate. but they need the skills and knowledge, but only half of all parents have talked to their children. So there's just this huge divide where young people in particular are struggling, but don't have the tools and resources. And the last thing I'll say is why, this is a public health issue, that the response to this needs to be looked at through a community model, that we need to reach people, young people in particular, where they're at, in schools, in homes, and so forth. And that there is obviously a need for therapists and psychiatrists and so forth to be trained in this, but that the way our medical system is designed, that a one-on-one therapy model is not accessible to many people, nor is it scalable to respond to every person who is struggling with climate emotions. And so we really need to think about, how do we address this when appropriate in a therapist room with people like Ben Liu, but also how do we respond to this at a community level, looking at it through a public health approach.
Thank you. Thank you, Sarah. I'm going to shift gears and talk to Maya, because Maya, there's lots of research about your generation and there's a lot of conversation about young people. I know that dinner table conversation that you're very familiar with the story. My kids were enough with the praise of Gen Z. What are you doing to help us create a healthier, greener future? Talk to us a little bit about your lived experience, what you and your peers are feeling, maybe what gives you hope, and kind of how the public health community can support this critical issue of climate anxiety.
Well, first, I just want to say that I'm, very grateful to, to be surrounded by the work that, all of you are doing, right now on this call, because it's so crucial, and there's so much nuance that is being recognized. And I just want to say that I'm very grateful for that. And I think what's really important, and everyone, has kind of touched on this, there is definitely, I think, a huge need for more intergenerational collaboration and communication in this area. I definitely, I have, because I've been in this space as an environmental activist and educator for 15 years now, like literally the majority of my life, I've been spending doing this work. And the thing that I have seen, and that shift has started to happen, but very, like, initially there was an attitude from many people in, older generations who are like, okay, we're handing the torch off to you, go run and save the world. And of course, it's amazing to have a positive support and a belief that, we can help make an impact and, and change the world. But the thing is, as I believe Tamara said, that this is that climate is the multiplier, right? This impacts everyone in some way. It's not a discriminator. Of course, people are impacted on different levels due to a number of different socioeconomic factors of systemic oppression, and of course, frontline communities, Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities in the global North, and communities in the global South are adversely impacted in specific ways compared to other communities, but everyone is being touched by the climate crisis in some capacity. So this is very much an all hands on deck situation, and it can't be left up to one generation to go at it alone, because, who's also going to be there when we need to, recharge and refuel to continue this fight. And the thing that's also really important, that, many frontline communities, we recognize the fact that so many of our ancestors have already been in the climate and environmental fight and have so much, experience and wisdom. Youth environmental activism and youth activism, period, is not a new invention with Generation Z. We just have our own, unique take on it, especially having access to so much technology to be able to organize and communicate with each other. And also, speaking of technology, we've also been able to normalize conversations around mental health, and we honestly still have a long way to go even within Generation Z, but there is a more open communication about anxiety, depression, and how all of these different factors interpersonally and externally impact our lives. I think the thing that's really crucial and what I love that all of this group embodies is that interconnectivity between different sectors, because for a very long time, the environmental space has been extremely siloed. And it's been very much treated as, an issue that, you might just think of plastic pollution, planting trees, some other stuff, and it's everything. Every industry is a climate industry. Every, job is a climate job. And because of, again, the widespread impact of people who have experienced the firsthand trauma of environmental disasters, or just people who are, witnessing, every year is the hottest year on record, essentially, or, various species of flora and fauna going extinct. So many things that are very traumatic and happening at a more increased pace. And then on top of that, I feel like there needs to be a balance between media that really brings you into here's what the problem is, but also addresses here's what the solutions are. I'm a solutions-based activist. So I'm always focused on here's what can actually be done. Here's what solutions or technologies are out there or, can be scaled, and really introducing people to the work that so many of us are doing on the ground and within our communities and within various disciplines and spaces to address this crisis. So I think that between all of those different things, there is a lot of, hope and optimism that we can look towards, and it's important to push that forward, as well as harnessing, that anger or that fear or that stress. How can you translate that into action, into speaking out and organizing?
Thank you so much, Maya, for your perspective. We have about 5 more minutes of the panelist discussion before we shift gears. I see there's already some questions popping up in the chat, but I'd love to hear from Tamara and then Ben. Tamara, talk to us. You heard Maya talking about how this isn't new, right? We have multiple generations of activists. You shared with us about your burnout report, the need for rest and recovery. Talk to us about the frontline experience and your research, maybe a little bit more, with about 2 minutes, and then we'll shift to the practitioner perspective with Ben. But Tamara.
Yeah, so I want to lift up that the front lines are frozen. The front lines are burnt. The front lines are full of drought. The front lines are full of people who have disassociated from the things they have loved, and they look very different. So every single movement for justice has experienced burnout. The difference for climate people is that our movement will not have enough time to mature. Like there are things like the problem itself is another thing that drives the challenge. Our work came from being the people who hold up the flashy signs and the giant clock and the mobilization that stops you in your town and inculcates your children. And one of my favorite parts of that part of the work was a campaign that we did in in Canada, where we got children to call their grandparents, because grandparents are sitting at home waiting for somebody to talk to them. We were like, why don't you call your grandparent and explain to them why you're so upset about climate? And it turns out it made 2 generations of people show up. Well, I didn't realize that you were this passionate about this, or you had all this data. I will also support you in the same way that I go to the voting booth. I'm going to get up and do this thing. And so we started to get early signs, even amongst all the really rabid mobilization, that there were things that could happen that could take advantage of who we were. The problem is that when we have a single solution, a single set of tactics, as opposed to a community, we fail to catch all of the energy around it. In the report, part of why I flagged that we talk to people who are volunteers, people who do this for a living, people who do it on the front lines, and people who get paid for it, is that there are different levels of guilt and shame based on how much of this data you have consumed about what's happening to the planet. It doesn't mean you're dealing with the problem any different. If you like coffee, you're dealing with climate change. If you enjoy eating at any point of your day, you are in the middle of a climate experience. The challenge is that whole body of work for how we frame it is about a very specific narrative that punishes you if you take the reputational risk of saying, I am tired. this makes me sad. I have feelings about it. I feel like I'm not winning. And so we got a lot of data from folks in the focus groups. Our researchers and those of us who worked on it, Marianne Haglar, who is one of our members and a colleague and a friend and a writer, we spent a lot of time thinking about how we could build a survey that just by asking the questions wouldn't trigger people. So we have a random weird statistic, which is that we have a large number of people who started to fill it out and then stopped. And we went back and asked them, why did you do that? And they said, because no one ever asked me this question before, and it was so triggering to have to think about my burnout or what drove me that I couldn't finish it. And so in addition to the survey, we put out a handful of first person essays written by people who were like, this whole thing visited upon me, a thing I'm still dealing with and showing up in my work because there's no place for me to hold
And
my
Tamara,
intellectual capacity and my experience.
that is so powerful, because once you know, you can't unknow. Once you see,
Yes.
once you do the research, it is really important that we provide those skills, which is why before we go to questions, I want to hear Ben, as a psychiatrist, his thought on tools, resources, what he's seeing in practices of how do we support people when they come to, when you mentioned guilt and shame, all of these feelings. I would love to hear from you, Dr. Ben Liu, what are you seeing in your practice? How can practitioners kind of bridge this gap that Tamara, Maya, and Sarah were talking about?
So yeah, I'm an inpatient psychiatrist 4 days out of the week, primarily, all clinical time. I wasn't even necessarily expecting to see like climate change, climate distress specifically, in that setting where, you have so many different social determinants and so many other like essential things that people are talking about, like their basic shelter and food insecurity, energy insecurity, and relationship stress. And so, yeah, I will be surprised that I actually have found people have brought this up even more than I would have thought. I think a lot of what we think about is interventions. In the therapy room, I mean, there is a climate therapist direct registry that is building. I mean, of course, that's not enough because that's one-to-one care, and what we're talking about, the scale of everything is here. We need community-based solutions, and I mean, even groups where you have cohorts of 10 to 20 people that you go through these variety of wonderful programs, whether that's the Good Grief Network or that's Joanna Macy's, the work that reconnects. I've heard of other ones like Carbon Conversations. These are group settings, but this is still not accessible to all. We have to bring it to the schools, to community settings, whether that be schools or the YMCAs. Providing education on climate and health is a place to start. I think that is a way that can be accepted a little more, in the sense that these are meeting basic needs, like teaching people how to protect themselves from air pollution and extreme heats. But then from that, I think we definitely want to intertwine the ecological distress, because I mean, I'm looking at these surveys, and Sarah, you cited an even more recent survey, possibly because you said, like, I think twice or three times the number of respondents in a slightly few more countries. But the one I'm thinking of, 2021, 10,000 youth, and over 10 countries. And like in that study, sure, 80% are moderately worried, but even 45% stated that they have functional impairment because climate change causes a functional impairment. So I guess my only thing to say is that so much of the curricula that is being developed is so new, like that a little bit of funding, I feel, would go such a long way, even just to have a part-time administrative assistant in so many of our different organizations.
Thank you. That is a great segue to opening up the conversation to our participants. This is an emerging area of philanthropy. We're seeing it across sectors. We're seeing it across generations. We know, and I know One Green Thing, we talk about being an awesome ancestor, this idea of paying it forward. I love, Tamara, when you talked about young people calling their grandparents and saying how they feel about the future that we're leaving them. We also work with older generations and ask them, what is your personal legacy? We try to make climate action very, very personal, so we can create that community and those community-based solutions and actions. But we'd love to, if you have any questions, please feel free to raise your hand and we'll turn it over to the group now. I know that there was some chatter, which I think you responded to, Sarah, about teachers. So Sarah, do you just want to respond to this question? And please, if you have any questions, just raise your hand as Jill shared with you or pop it in the chat. But Sarah, maybe you want to talk about Scott's questions about teachers?
Sure. And thank you, Scott, for raising that. So the Climate Mental Health Network is doing a lot of work in the education sector, in the K through 12 sector. Thanks to the Ho Foundation, which is here today, a very generous, very thoughtful supporter of our work. And so what we've done over the past year is focus groups with middle school teachers to understand whether or not they teach climate, how students are showing up in the classroom, and how teachers are able to support them with their climate emotions and what resources might they need. I can't share any of the data yet because we're still finishing it, but we will eventually share this publicly. But what I can say is that we know that most students are showing up with a range of climate emotions, both from learning about the climate crisis, whether it's in the classroom or on social media, or from their direct experiences, whether they couldn't come to school because of, say, wildfire smoke, or they're displaced because of a hurricane, whatever it might be, or wildfire. And we know that research shows that when it comes to climate emotions, that students feel most comfortable going to their teachers about it, as opposed to going to like a principal or an administrator in the school or the school nurse or so forth. And so we know that there is a huge need for teachers to have resources so that they can be able to support their students. And at the same time, we recognize that teachers are already overwhelmed and burdened with so many tasks in the classroom and things that they have to manage. And so we are also designing resources to support teachers' well-being for their climate emotions. And it's akin to when you get on an airplane with a young child, that the adult puts their oxygen mask on first before putting it on to the young child, and that we can't be asking teachers or parents to do this work without their own support. And I just going to say one more thing really quickly, is that we also are working on a climate justice curriculum in California, and we are informing the SEL component of that K through 12 curriculum, which is being led by 10 Strands.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And at One Green Thing, we're focused on teaching the teachers too. I think that's important to talk about the teacher burnout while the kids are in pain and suffering, like how that all builds on itself. I think that's such important work. I know tomorrow you have to head out soon, and there's one question from Kalila in the chat. Tomorrow you talked a little bit about the complexity of this issue across different generations in the workforce. Could you talk about that more?
Sure. And there was a question earlier about the impact on volunteers. So I wanted to flag that our data set, our capacity in our community includes volunteers. We have best practices twice a year that involve activists, organizers, folks who are in community, and we go for just under a week together to practice. In between, we meet up to talk about challenges, issues. We have show-ups where we show up all across the movement, and our birthday is during Climate Week. It's actually Earth, Wind, and Fire Day, which means someone in the IRS has a sense of humor because they sent a smiley face on our note saying we are a C3, and it had like a smile like on Earth, Wind, and Fire Day, September 20th. This is insane. So every year we get to celebrate our birthday during Climate Week, and at a panel that we had, we offered a rest practice where we invited people to come to a salt bath in New York, like in the middle of Climate Week. Just drop out for 2 hours, get into a salt bath, change your energy, and get back out there to your networking and see if that helps, right? So this is the kind of thing that we do. We just offer people the care, like upfront with no strings attached. We offer it. And we had a panel following that the same day where there was a random example of what you asked about, Kalila. So there's an activist who just retired after 40 years of being in climate and environment. And another person who is in our community, they have had practice together. And over the course of 2 years of practice, they never talked about the work they did together. The younger person wrote an article in Vogue about burnout before we had this language for it. The older person felt like, are you saying I did this to you? On that person's retirement, they looked over at the event at Climate Week and said, I thought you were writing that about me burning you out. And I realized that I was burned out, which is why I read it that way. They started to hug. They were crying, and people were like, did you make this happen? I was like, all we did was put them in a room together a lot to sleep and rest and eat food and wake up and sometimes do yoga and sometimes do breathing. And somewhere in there, they decided to have a conversation that had been waiting for a really long time to talk about concerns about harm, offense, and resentments as they're both up against this challenge at different ends of their life. And so this is what we do. It comes up regularly. The podcast that I put in the resources with Peggy Shepard, you should listen to it because it is her. She called me and said, what is it that all these kids mean about burnout? What are they saying? They say they don't want jobs. And I said, no, they're talking about the quality of life they have while they do these jobs. And she said, I was taught that you work until you almost die, and then when you're 35, someone gives you a desk. And so in the room were a bunch of young people producing the podcast. They were all crying. They were like, we thought you were mean to us. You're just mean. You're not being nice to yourself. You're not being mean to us. And it was like all the times I've said as a middle-aged person, I got to look at both ends of the seesaw and recognize somebody with familiarity. You can see it that it is not harm coming from people who are elders, it's folks who have not had any language for care for themselves, feeling disempowered from sharing their experience with you because they don't want you to have the experience they had. And so we exist as an intervention just for this reason.
That is so beautiful, Tamara. And I saw Maya shaking her head, Sarah and Ben as well, about older generations not necessarily having the language to talk about mental health and burnout. And I know one of my experiences that was really pivotal when I spoke at Clinton Global last year during Climate Week, Dr. Tia Dole was talking about Generation Z, and she said, hey, baby boomers and Gen X, these young people, they don't want your life. They don't want, thank you so much for Tamara for joining us. We appreciate it. And everyone's contact information will be in the follow-up email. Thank you so much, Tamara. We really appreciate it. Dr. Tia Dole was talking about mental health in teenagers and saying, you know, Gen Z does not want your life, baby boomers. They do not want your life, Gen X. They do not want to have these jobs, take their 4-year liberal arts education and have the jobs that we have. They are looking at a future that is so uncertain. And some of them are asking whether or not should they even continue their studies. You know, what is life going to be like in 2030, 2035? And that's where I would love to ask a question to Maya. One of the things when I was giving a talk to a bunch of fifth graders, I heard a little girl raised her hand. She was, and I'm not smarter than a fifth grader, just to be very clear. I learned that with these talks in elementary schools. But this fifth grader said, you know, is there any type of experience, a virtual reality experience that I could like step into and see what life would be like if the Sustainable Development Goals were met? I mean, if we ended poverty by 2030, if we had clean water for all, you know, what could that feel like? What could that be like? So could you talk a little bit, Maya, about creators and the roles of creators in dealing with mental health and community-based solutions? And then we'll do a quick lightning round after your response.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, that fifth grader is amazing, and like I feel like already like kindred with them. I mean, the thing that as a creator, as a filmmaker, as a multidisciplinary artist and educator, media has a huge role in how we, you know, move through the world and how we show up in our community and within these various spaces in industries. I think that there's been a lack of nuance when it comes to accessibility to education around environmental science, climate, and its connection with mental health, etc. So I talked about my production company, Dependent Productions, and we've both created and are developing and launching a number of different medias across animation, documentary, VR, and AR. So that's shout out to the fifth grader, and immersive experiences that focus on both environmental education, speaking about environmental justice in past, present, and future, as well as, you know, taking topics like eco-anxiety, climate and environmental trauma, and translating them in a way that's accessible, because there are so many both families and people of all ages who, you know, they've heard and they've seen this climate crisis is upon us, but they just don't know how to engage or where. And it's really important to call those people in a way that is informative, empowering, and really leads to action and tangible impact. Even for our animated short, Asali that I spoke about, that Violet Davis is executive producing, that I'm doing for my production company, we're doing putting together a number of workshops around speaking to climate anxiety, environmental justice, and an intergenerational collaboration and communication based off of the themes of the film. So, absolutely anyone who, we're looking for collaborators for those workshops that are happening next year. And art has a huge role. Art and media has a huge, huge role in how we show up as Generation Z, how we educate each other, from creating our own content to the content that we're putting out as larger creative groups and studios.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Maya. I do think that Tina wanted to ask a question, but Tina, if you're having challenges asking a question, please raise your hand. I don't see a hand raised. So it may have to be in the chat. And then I'm seeing Robin Cooper also saying, that Janice Lewis says we need to envision a type of world we want to live in. Those are the types of trainings that we offer for teachers and mental health professionals and community leaders at One Green Thing, using art, using creativity, thinking about what are we working toward? We need to see it. One of my friends who's a psychologist said, no sports psychologist will tell a client, don't envision winning. We have to start and change a conversation and visualizing and using the technology to visualize what it could look like if we get it right. What could that positive vision of the future be like? We have 5 more minutes, and I see that Ben's popping a lot of resources into the chat. Let's do a quick lightning round before we conclude. If there's any other questions, please put them in the chat. My lightning round for you all is, and we're going to start with Ben. Ben, what do you need from the philanthropic community to support this emerging area? And what's your biggest takeaway from the conversation?
Well, what do we need? Thank you for the question. I mean, we work on such a shoestring budget. Just to reiterate, it's just that so many of these wonderful organizations, whether that's the Climate Psychology Group, CPA-NA, or Climate Psychiatry, or Climate Mental Health Network, the ones that I'm more familiar with, we do so much in our extracurricular time, as Dr. Cooper, as Robin has said in the chat. We're fortunate that we've finally had a little bit of part-time, 20 hours a week, 30 hours a week of help there. And then we have a project coordinator for Ecocyclopedia. And so, but yeah, the grants are few and far in between to do projects like that. And so, there's so many wonderful programs being done. There's such a long list.
I totally understand. Thank you. Thank you, Ben. I'm going to now ask Sarah the same question. And we're just excited for the opportunity to even share all of this work. There's so much great work going on. Go ahead, Sarah. That's your lightning round question.
Yeah,
what do you need and biggest takeaway?
Our biggest need is more support for our youth-focused intergenerational work. So our work with educators, youth, and parents. And my biggest takeaway is that I have 2. One is that I'm so grateful that in this space, in the climate mental health space, that we are so collaborative, and really the organizations are constantly figuring out, how do we work together? How do we do events together? How do we fundraise together? How do we move this forward together rather than doing this siloed? And the last thing I'll just add, and this is to the question earlier, is that we have to keep hope. We can't, that it's so essential to have what Joanna Macy calls active hope, in terms of not giving up on what we're experiencing with the climate crisis, with our climate emotions, and that we have to have active hope to try to achieve the vision that we each are wanting to create in the world.
Thank you, Sarah. Maya, biggest takeaway, what support do you need?
Well, first of all, thank you for this question. And I mean, climate storytelling, climate media is a space that is so needed and is more than emerging. And we focus on job creation, especially for marginalized, diverse, and Gen Z artists who are also translating this, eco-anxiety into this media. And so we need support for projects like this, and for climate education through creative media, as well as really facilitating coalitions and, communities and task force around this media that can translate into real life action, conversation, policy change, having that direct connection between the media that's being produced and the real world tangible impact that can be spawned from that. That requires a lot of community building. So those are the two pieces.
Thank you, Maya. We have 2 more minutes and we're gonna wrap it up right now. There was a question about advice for artists that Tina had. I'm gonna ask you, Tina, to reach out to Maya directly about climate grief and using art as a strategy. So I'll make sure you two connect after this webinar. Big takeaway for onegreenthing.org is this is an emerging area of philanthropy. Eco-anxiety and climate anxiety are going to be household words. When I first put out this book, the publisher, publishers are not known for taking risks, right? They were really nervous about eco-anxiety. In September, you're going to see the paperback with the original title, because more and more young people are having these conversations with the people they love about the future we're inheriting with them. I also want to say what Sarah said, active hope. Active hope requires creativity, but it also requires a sense of agency. We need to give people a way in so they can feel like they're part of the movement. That starts with conversation, that starts with spaces like Tamara is creating. It also starts with you and your own personal reflection, which is what we do at One Green Thing. How can you contribute? You don't have to be everything to all people. Yes, skipping the straw matters. These simple behaviors in a larger context can shift the culture that we need in order for these big policy solutions to work. Thank you so much, the public health community. We're thrilled to connect with you. Thank you, Hefin. Thank you, Grant Makers in Health. Thank you, Jill and Kalila, the whole team, and Monique for doing the slides. Thrilled to have our panelists join us today. We will have a follow-up email. Please reach out. Please talk to us. Please support this emerging area of philanthropy. And we're so grateful for your time. Thank you.